Hi everyone, welcome to this walkthrough video on getting started with PolyAPI. We're going to begin here on the PolyAPI website by going to polyapi.io. Over on the right, you're going to see a blue Get Started button. We're going to click this to begin the sign-up process, create a tenant, and get our unique API key that will give us access to the PolyAPI platform. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to begin by selecting a Poly instance. Instances are physical deployments of Poly managed by Poly's DevOps team. There's two managed instances to choose from, NA1 North America and EU1 Europe. You're going to select an instance based off of your business needs. For this demo, we're going to do NA1 North America. And then click Select Instance. Now we'll need to fill out this form to sign up for a new account and create our tenant. We're going to begin by putting our email, providing a name for our tenant, and selecting a service tier. To try Poly without any commitments, select Free Trial. And then check the box to agree to PolyAPI's terms of service and click Sign Up. Now we'll need to get the verification code that was sent to our email to activate our account. So let's go to our email and click Verify Code. Great, now our sign-up is complete and we have our API key. This API key is unique to your tenant and ensures secure access with granular permissions. Just an important note, your API key will only be shown once, so you need to store it somewhere safe. If you lose it, contact the PolyAPI support team at support@polyapi.io. Now with your API key, we can log into the Poly UI to manage resources, build custom CRUD applications, and auto-generate user interfaces. Additionally, we also have these useful links that will help us get started along the way. So let's go ahead and go to our login and put our API key and click Login. After logging in, the main content area may display a message that says No API functions found, indicating that no API functions have been created yet through training of your APIs. We'll cover this in a future demo video. For now, let's go ahead and explore the sidebar menu where we can view and manage all of our APIs, webhooks, triggers, and more. If we click, for example, Public API Functions, we'll get a list of all of our pre-trained out-of-the-box API functions that are ready for your integration needs. If we click into one, we'll see further details about this API function, like the name, context, the description, the arguments, the type schema, and more. We also have our admin section and our support section. Under support, we have helpful links with all the resources that will help you along the way. For this next part of the demo, we're going to need to set up the development tools. To start developing with PolyAPI, we'll need to install Visual Studio Code, and for this project, we're going to need to install Node.js if developing in TypeScript. So let's go ahead and click the links to install Visual Studio Code and Node.js. And click Install. Additionally, now I'll need to download the Visual Studio Code. Now let's go ahead and install our PolyAPI extension. Here with Visual Studio Code open, we're going to create our first project. We're going to go up to File, Open Folder, and create a new folder, which will be our project for developing. Now we'll want to install the PolyAPI extension. Go over to the left and click the extension icon. We'll search for PolyAPI and click Install. You'll see the palm tree icon appear, and we'll click this to set up our Poly client and generate our SDK. Click Set up Poly client, Project type will be TypeScript. We're going to choose the instance we selected during signup, which was NA1, input our API key, and then click Yes to install dependencies. Great, now we have generated our Poly TypeScript SDK. We can go over to the left and see all of our APIs cataloged in our Poly tree view. We can click into it to get more details about a specific function. For example, we have the create in workspace a task. This API call is used to create a new task in Asana with a nice description. If we click on it, it will copy to our clipboard where we can easily integrate it into our code. So let's go ahead and open a new file. And paste the function into our code. Now, if we click into this function to go to definition, you'll see that each function comes with type schemas and return types that can be easily copied into your code. And over on the right, we have our Poly AI Assistant. When you first installed the Poly extension, you might have seen the pair icon appear over on the left. You can easily drag and drop this over on the right view panel. Here we can ask Poly about APIs and events. We can also use special commands like \help and get conversational special commands for using Poly. Now let's ask Poly a question. Like, how do I create a task and a project for Asana? Here, Poly has generated a nice code example of how to use this pre-trained function for creating a task in a project for Asana. Now let's go ahead and copy and paste this into our code. Now if we right-click onto the function and go to the definition, and then right-click on the argument, we can see what part of the payload is required. The ones with the question marks are optional. So the only thing that it's needing is the project ID. So let's go back to our code. Now we'll need to input the values for our payload and also provide our access token. So we can either hard code our access token, or we can use Vari where we can securely pass or inject our access token as a variable. I'll go ahead and show you how to do that back in our Poly UI. Now back in our Poly UI, let's go to variables, create, and now we can create a variable for our access token. So we'll give it a name. Provide the context in which we want it to be stored in the polytree library. If we don't give a description, one will be AI generated for us. We'll select the visibility environment and then select secret true. Select the value type string and input our access token here. For example, click submit. Now we can go back and update our access token to provide the actual value. Additionally, let's go ahead and create a variable for our project ID. Give it a name under the context Asana variables. And for this one, it's not going to be a secret. And we're going to do the value type string. And click Submit. Now let's go back to Visual Studio Code where we can securely inject these variables into our code. Now that we're back in Visual Studio Code, let's go ahead and regenerate our Poly client to see our newly created variables added to the Poly tree library. Click under Asana, and as you can see, we have our newly created variables access token and project type. If we hover over the variable, it will give us a nice description. Now let's go ahead and click to copy to our clipboard and paste it into our code. We'll have to also import Vari. I'm going to get rid of some of this payload that I don't need. And change the due date to tomorrow. Now let's go ahead and run this code to see our newly created task. Down in our terminal, we'll input tsnode create task.ts. Great. Now you can see that we have our first code example working, that a task was created. Now if we go to Asana, we can see this newly created task. Has been added, Alex's new task, with the due date tomorrow. Now let's go back to Visual Studio Code, and I'll show you how to deploy your first custom server function. Let's go ahead and clear our terminal. And now what we're going to want to do is deploy our custom server function, create Asana task. So let's comment out our example usage, and we're going to run this command in our terminal. npx poly function add create Asana task, which is our server function, from the file create task.ts under the context in which it's going to be stored asana.server function. As you can see in our polytree library, we have our newly created server function, create Asana task. Let's go ahead and click and ask Poly how to use this server function. Great, Poly has created a nice code example of how to use this function, create Asana task. So let's go ahead and test this function out. Create a new file and paste the code example into our script. Now let's go ahead and run this code. And as you can see, we have our newly created custom function working. Now let's go over to Asana and see that our task was added to our project. And here we have our additional task added. And lastly, let's go to our PolyUI where we can see our server function was added. Let's refresh our page. And you can see our server function to create Asana task was added. And that's it for this demo video. Thank you for watching. I hope this was helpful. As a reminder, we have helpful links under our support section in the PolyUI. You can click the Poly Quick Start documentation for additional information. Happy developing!